All right, today we're going to be solving polynomial equations. Now, we've done this already in a sense when we started to graph these polynomials, because when we graph polynomials, we had to find our x-intercepts. And when we want to solve them now, we're going to be doing a little bit of that same process. So, for example, we're going to solve this polynomial here. If I would have asked you to graph this instead, what you would do is you would go to your box and you would put x to the third in the upper left and 5 in the lower right. And then it doesn't matter where you put the other 2. And then you would factor this. So let's go ahead and factor. GCF of the first column is x squared. The GCF of the second column is a 1, but because that top number is negative, it's going to be negative 1. And then over here, we're going to have x and negative 5, because negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5. And x times x squared is x to the third. So now our factored form will be this. Okay, so far the direction, we've done the same steps that we did for graphing in the previous lessons. And then we would say x equals positive 5. And then we would set this equal to 0. Add 1 to both sides. And x squared equals 1. And then when we square root both sides, x equals plus or minus 1. So our solutions are x equals 5, x equals negative 1, and x equals 1. Now, if the directions would have said to graph this, you would have plotted those x-intercepts and then drawn in your polynomial function based on the end behavior and leading coefficient. But since the directions say to just solve, this is it. We're done. That's our final answer. So we're doing a little bit less work in some instances, but we may have to do some manipulation at the beginning before we factor to answer the question. So number 2 says, what are the solutions to this equation? So we're going to set it equal to 0. And solve this by factoring. Well, they have an x squared in common, so we're going to factor that out. So we get x to the fourth minus 16x, just 16. And then we're going to factor this here, x to the fourth minus 16. So we're going to do our x. And in the bottom of the x, because we don't have an x squared term, it's just going to be 0. And on the top of our x will be negative 16 times an invisible 1, so negative 16. So we need 2 numbers that multiply to negative 16 but add to 0. Well, the only way for 2 numbers to add to 0 is if one of the numbers is positive and one of the numbers is negative, and if the numbers are exactly the same, like positive 2 and negative 2. But we need these 2 numbers to multiply to negative 16. So we're going to do negative 4 and positive 4. And because our a value was 1, we don't necessarily need to do the box. So our next step will be 0 equals x squared times x squared minus 4 times x squared plus 4. And then like in the previous problem, we're just going to set each part equal to 0. X squared equals 0, and take the square root of both sides. Well, the square root of 0 is 0. So x equals, and since we are taking the square root to solve this, you need to worry about plus or minus. Well, there's really no such thing as, positive 0 and negative 0. So we can just say x equals 0, since it's the same thing. So realistically, you don't need to do this step right here, those things right there, if you just have like a variable out in front, an x squared, an x to the fourth, a 2x to the fourth. That's just going to tell you x equals 0. And we have this part, x squared minus 4 equals 0. Add 4 to both sides. X squared equals positive 4. And then we get x equals plus or minus 2. And then this last part, x squared plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4 from both sides. Well, when we do the square root here, we get an error in the calculator. We get no real solutions for this part. Our calculator will say an error. So we don't have any real solutions for that part there. However, we still have our other solutions, x equals 0, x equals negative 2, and x equals 2. So just because that last factor there, that x squared plus 4, just because we didn't get any real solutions from that, it does not mean that we have no solutions for the whole problem. We just have fewer than we could have had. We have 3 solutions to this one. All right, let's look at number 3. It says find x when f of x equals 9 and f of x equals 6x squared minus 3x. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to set these equal to each other. And we'll do 9 equals 6x squared minus 3x. So we need to move everything to one side of the equation. So we'll subtract 9 from both sides. And we get 6x squared minus 3x minus 9. Sorry, 0 equals that. Now we want to factor this, and we have a GCF. We have a greatest common factor of 3. So we're going to factor out a 3, and we're left with 2x squared minus x minus 3. And then we can factor this part right here using our Xbox method. So x, and our b value is negative 1. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So two numbers that multiply to negative 6 but add to negative 1, those two numbers are negative 3 and 2. So now we can go and fill in this box that I drew. So we're going to hit 2x squared in the upper left, negative 3 in the lower right, and then it doesn't matter where we put the negative 3x and the 2x. Let's do it this way. Then the first column, our GCF is just x. The second column, our GCF is just a 1. There's no number that you can divide 2x and negative 3 by besides 1. So then the other side, x times 2x gives you 2x squared, and 1 times negative 3 gives you negative 3. So then we have 0 equals 3 times x plus 1 times 2x minus 3. Here we get x equals negative 1. And for this, you got to do 2x minus 3 equals 0. Add 3 to both sides. So 2x equals 3. And then when you divide both sides by 2, x equals 3 over 2, and that is your answer. Number 4 over here, find the roots of the equation. Remember, roots are the same thing as finding the x-intercepts. So what we're going to do here is we're going to factor and solve. And since we have an x to the 4th and an x squared and then no x, that's going to tell us we're going to do x box again, where negative 17 goes down at the bottom, and 1 times 72, which equals 72, goes on the top. So two numbers that multiply to positive 72, but add up to negative 17, well, that's going to be negative 9 and negative 8. So then we'll make our box, and x to the 4th goes in the upper left, and 72 goes in the lower right, and then negative 8x squared and negative 9x squared. And like always, you can flip those two, the two that I have in green right here. GCF of the first column here is going to be x squared. The GCF of the second column is 8, but because that top number is negative, we have to put a negative 8 there. Then the left side, x squared times x squared equals x to the 4th. Negative 8 times negative 9 equals positive 72. So then back over here, we're going to write y equals x squared minus 8 and x squared minus 9. And then, all right, x squared minus 8, we'll set that equal to 0. Add 8 to both sides. X squared equals 8. And now when we square root this, we have to simplify this radical. The square root of 8 can be simplified to the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. The square root of 4 is 2, so we're going to get x equals plus or minus 2 times the square root of 2. And we do the plus or minus because we are taking the square root to solve. Anytime you need to take the square root to solve an equation, you need to account for the plus or minus. So we have x squared minus 9 equals 0. Add 9 to both sides. X squared equals 9. We have x equals plus or minus 3. So my solutions, x equals negative 2 times the square root of 2, x equals 2 times the square root of 2, x equals negative 3, and x equals positive 3. I always like to write out every solution separately on its own. This just helps me remember that I have all of them. If it's a multiple choice question or we have check boxes to fill in, I can easily see that I have 4 answers to this question. I have 4 x-intercepts. All right, we are going to skip number 5 because we've been doing stuff like this for the other ones. So we're going to go to number 6. Now in number 6, we have this big old mess here. I want to move everything to the left side because x to the 5th is my biggest exponent here. So I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides. Now watch what I do is that on the right side, I'm going to write the minus x squared under the 13x squared. What this allows me to do is it allows me to easily combine my like terms. If I were to subtract 6x to the 3rd and write it right here, it is very easy to try to combine this with one of the other terms up here. that is right under. So I like to kind of group them together. So if I'm subtracting 6x to the third from both sides, I'll write it under the 10x to the third, so that way both x to the third powers are right on top of each other, and I'm not likely to make a mistake when I try to simplify this. So on the left side, these go away. So 0 is equal to x to the fifth plus 3x to the fourth. 10x to the third minus 6x to the third is 4x to the third. And 13x squared minus x squared is positive 1x squared. So now what I will do is look at this here and factor that. We can factor out a GCF of x squared. So let's do that. And we are left with x to the third plus 3x squared plus 4x plus, whoops, I forget. This should be 12x plus 12 at the very end here. So now I can take this stuff inside the parentheses and factor it using my box. X to the third and 12 go in the corners. And then the other corners, it doesn't matter what I put in each of those. So we can do 3x squared and 4x here. So in the first column, our GCF between x to the third and 4x is x. And the GCF between 3x squared and 12 is 3. And then x times x squared gives us x to the third. 3 times 4 gives us 12. So we have 0 equals x squared times x plus 3 times x squared plus 4. And then we will set each part equal to 0. So x equals 0. Like we did on the second problem, we don't need to write x squared equals 0 to do the square root of both sides and then plus or minus 0, because there is no negative 0. 0 is just 0. So it'll be x equals 3. And here, x squared plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4 from both sides. X squared equals negative 4. Well, we're going to be taking the square root of a negative number again, and we can't do that. So this will give us an error in the calculator. So the only two real answers we have are x equals 0 and x equals 3. So I hope that this was a good refresher, because you've been doing a lot of this previously. It's just it was written a little bit different. You guys have been doing a great job factoring and finding your x-intercepts. Now I'm just asking you to do the same thing in a little bit different way. So thank you for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe.